I'm going to show you guys how to start doing chord melody arrangements on the guitar. It's a pretty loaded concept, so the more you know, the easier time you're going to have with this. In general, what I would recommend knowing is a bunch of different chord shapes, your triad inversions, or how to find your triad inversions, and at least being able to hear your way through a major scale. Even if you don't know the scale in multiple positions, just being able to figure it out. So we're going to start really simple with a melody that a lot of people know, Amazing Grace. There are a couple different chord progressions you can use for this song, but we're going to start very simple and then we can sort of dress it up later on. All right, let's get into it. All right, so we're going to play this melody in the key of G major. The first part of it sounds like this. So let's just start with that little part there. So I'll tell you the chord progression. It's going to be G, and then over here we're going to have a C, back to G. So it's just G, C, and G. What we're going to do is just harmonize this melody with some chord voicings. So when you're starting out, I think the easiest way to go about it is just play the chord on beat 1 of each measure. If there are 2 chords within one measure, make sure you play those 2 chords as well. So every time the next measure starts, I'm going to make sure I'm hitting that chord that's landing there. And everything in between is just going to be melody. So this is a pickup note here. When I land on the G right there, I'm going to play some form of G chord that has that note on top. And what you'll notice is with a melody like this and with a lot of melodies, those melody notes will be chord tones, meaning they'll already be included in that chord. So you'll see here we're landing on a G and we're playing a G chord. So it's perfect. It makes our lives a little bit easier. So I think we should start with just triads of these chords. So like I said before, what's going to help is knowing your triad inversions, and that looks like this for G major. So all you need to build a G major chord is those 3 notes, a G, B, and D. So here's G, B, D, here's D, G, B, here's G, B, D. It's just basically finding those 3 notes together and all their different combinations on each set of strings. If you know all those shapes, you're not really going to have any issues with finding a chord to harmonize the melody. Because all I got to do here is figure out which triad shape it is that has the G on top. It's that one there. You can think of it like this big G here, just the top piece of it. Now when I get to the next one, the chord is still G here, so I'm going to play another G, and look at this, the melody note on the downbeat of that next measure is a B, which is included in our G chord already. It's a chord tone again. So I can just find the triad that has that chord tone or melody note on top, and it's going to be this one. Now here is when we're switching the chord, the next measure. We got to find a C chord that has this melody note on top. This melody note is a G. G is the 5 of C. It's included in a C triad. So this is my C shape that has that melody note on top. Now when I get back here on this D, this is the downbeat of the next measure, I'm going to land back on a G chord. So I just got to find a triad that has that note on top. Now this is nice because all the melody notes have been chord tones so far. So it's super easy. We can just find the triad with that specific chord tone on top and it'll work. Also notice how I am keeping the melody note on top. That's because to our ears, for whatever reason, that high note rings out as like a melody to us. It's easy for us to hear that way. If you have the melody in the middle or down low, it can get kind of lost. So let's just continue to the next part here. So here you can add a little more chord movement, but let's just say it's going G to D. Okay, so for this first G, again another G, so those same 2 triads. When I get up here to this note, that's going to be a D chord. There's a D triad with the D on top. Again, knowing all your triad shapes is going to help with this tremendously. Another way to go about it, if you don't know your triad shapes and you want to get started on this, just use a chord you know in that area. Hopefully you know something in that area and you can add that note on top. You know, a lot of people know this bar chord shape that has that note on top. Let's say you know like this one, but you want to get that note up there. You can just take some of those notes and add that melody note on top if you want, and you'll achieve a similar effect. All right, now we played that melody in one part of the guitar. You can play it in another position. So let's say I'm up here. do the same thing. I'm going to find triads that have my melody note on top, and they're going to be the same ones as here, just because I'm doing the same thing here. The shapes are just going to look slightly different. So it's going to look like this. So there my triads are like, here's G, that's the same thing as this. There's another G, and we have, it's the same thing as this. Just a quick tip about the triads is I would try to visualize them in relation to a larger chord shape. So the easiest one to see for me would be like, this one is basically just a piece of this chord, right? This one up here, it's kind of like an open C shape moved up. This one here, it's kind of like this. That's just going to help you remember this a lot better. So yeah, you can do it in different positions. I can also do it up here. Now real quick, I want to show you an example of a time the melody note is actually not a chord tone, or at least not landing on it right away. The very beginning of Isn't She Lovely? Assuming we're doing this in the key of G, that first note on the downbeat is an A, and the first chord is an E minor, or an E minor 7. So in an E minor chord, there's no A. It's not a chord tone in E minor. So we would have to add that note on top of the chord. So what I would do in this situation, let's say I was just using triads again. What I'm gonna do is find a triad that's very close by to that melody note. So if my melody note's here, I know I have an E minor triad right here. Kind of like a piece of this chord. So I'm just gonna take that melody note and replace the high note of this triad with the melody note. So this chord by itself, you can't really call that E minor, but it is implied, because we're playing this in the context of a song, that this is an E minor chord. And in this example also, the melody does actually go down and inevitably lands on that minor third. Another place you can do it, let's say I chose this triad. Remember how we want the melody note to be on top, right? So I'm going to move that top note to the melody note. Either of those would work. So if you're doing this with more complicated songs, you'll probably come across that a little more often. All right, let's cycle back to Amazing Grace. So what happens if we want to add like a 7th chord in there? Well, all you got to do is use the same concept that we've done with triads, just with an extra note. So for this part here, over this note, you could play a G7 if you wanted to. And this is where it's going to help to know now all your G7 inversions. So all these chords here, that's all G7 up the neck, just playing the inversions like the triad inversions, just with one extra note in there. So over here, I'm just going to pick the G7 chord inversion that has this note on top. Another thing you can do is say, like, let's say you don't know the 7th inversions and you want just a quicker way to do this. You can just take the triad and be like, how can I include an F in here? Or how can I include the flat 7 in here to make it a G7? You could replace the root of the chord, this G, with an F or with your flat 7. And that gives you most of the notes in a G7 minus the G. Then once you do that, you can be like, all right, now that my G is gone, I'm going to add it down here. So essentially, without actually knowing this chord shape, you're building the chord in a way. Let's say over here, we wanted to do a C major 7. So what I would do, if I didn't know this kind of crazy chord inversion there, you could say, okay, here's C. I know my major 7 is just a half step down from the root. Now, right now, I have B, E, and G, and in relation to C, the only note missing here for a C major 7 would be a C. So I can just add a C somewhere around here, you know? Down here works nice. Some of you may know this voicing already. And then going back to G. And here, all I'm doing, like, here's my triad. I'm just adding another note from the triad below the root. So now there are 2 Ds in there, but it's still just a G chord. And that's essentially how guitar chords are built anyway. For example, in a bar chord, it's just 3 notes, but some of them are repeated, right? You have 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. So So this is the point where you can start to make a bunch of decisions, and there are endless things you can decide. So let's say a decision I'll make is I'm going to play a chord for every melody note. It would sound like this. You might decide I want to keep the melody really bare and just kind of have one or two notes harmonizing the melody at times. You could decide to have some sort of common tone or drone tone or something. You could decide to have some more low end in there, you know, some bass notes. Bigger chords, smaller chords, just one harmony note. Maybe you'll harmonize in sixths or something. And then you can get into actually substituting chords with other chords, adding passing chords. That may sound something like this. So there, before getting to the C chord, I added like a B7 passing chord. This is a diminished chord. I have a whole video on how to use diminished chords on my channel if you want to check that out. Here's the C, and then I went another diminished passing chord, back to G. So kind of endless things you can do. I would say order of operations if you're starting out, just learn the melody first, get the melody really strong, learn your triads up and down the neck, and then experiment with tying the two together and following the steps of this video. This is something that you can get really creative with because there are kind of endless things you can do. If you want examples, I do a lot of chord melody arrangements on my Instagram and my TikTok that you can go check out. It's just eli.koskoff. I also have more on my channel, and I'm happy to dive into this more too. If you guys have questions, leave them in the comments. Like the video, please subscribe. I'll definitely be posting more content like this. All right, thanks for watching.